Okay, welcome back to Module 5, Integrated Pest Management, otherwise known as IPM. So we're going to talk about the different components of an IPM program, including cultural, mechanical, physical, biological, behavioral, and chemical treatments, pests and beneficial organism identification, recognition of pests and their life cycles, the importance of monitoring and how to perform effective monitoring, injury and action thresholds, and how pesticide resistance develops. So, IPM. Integrated pest management is a decision-making process for preventing pests and using the most effective and environmentally sound pest treatment methods. In IPM programs, all available information and treatment methods are considered. So, the components are prevention, identification, monitoring, using injury and action thresholds, using treatments, and then evaluating. Okay. So, what are the advantages of using IPM? IPM can provide long-term solutions to pest problems, can protect the environment and human health by reducing the amount of pesticide use, minimize harm to beneficial organisms that control pests, and slow down or eliminate the development of pesticide-resistant pest populations. Provide pest control options where pesticides cannot be used. So, prevention. Prevention means making changes in management practices to prevent pest problems from occurring. Many of the pest treatments categorized as cultural or physical can also be considered preventative. For example, selecting disease or insect-resistant plants, managing growing conditions to promote healthy crops, cleaning to eliminate food sources for pests, or screening buildings to keep pests out. Some IPM treatments, cultural treatments. Cultural controls involve changing your management practice to make the environment unfavorable for pest reproduction, dispersal, and survival. So if you're in your book in chapter 5, page 3, it lists, some ideas for cultural treatments on page 3, page 4, and then you've got mechanical and physical treatments and biological treatments. And anyway, we'll talk about all these. Mechanical and physical treatments are treatments that use equipment or manipulate the environmental factors such as temperature or humidity to prevent the spread of pests or reduce pest populations. Examples can be found. Okay, we've already talked on page 4 in the manual. Biological treatments are controls that use living organisms to control pests. So on 5-5, you've got some of the ideas for biological treatments. Here's some pictures of some beneficial insects. You've seen this one already. So this is a ladybug feeding on aphids. Okay. Parasitizing wasp, feeding on a gypsy moth caterpillar. This would be I believe the toadflax weevil, I believe. This here would be sheep grazing on leafy spurge. So, these are biological controls. So, other species controlling pests. Behavioral treatments. These treatments include taking advantage of pest natural behavior to suppress populations. Examples using pheromones to disrupt mating patterns or attract pests to a trap, releasing sterile males to inhibit pest population. So here's an example of some pheromone traps. So this trap releases a pheromone that attracts a specific pest, and then as they're attracted to it, they get stuck to the sticky board. Another type of trap here. Chemical treatments. Chemical controls include the use of natural and synthetic pesticides to kill, attract, repel, or alter the growth of pests. The pesticide is applied directly to the pest, to its host, or to the medium to which the pest lives. Use chemicals that are as target specific as possible to minimize impacts to the environment and non-target species. So here's some pictures of, this fella's hand spraying with a gun, with the hose. I'm assuming it goes back and is attached to his truck. Here we got some farm equipment. We got an airplane. We got a backpack sprayer. So some methods of applying chemical treatments. It's very important to keep records of your pesticide applications. It will assist in developing a good IPM program and help determine the cause of lack of control when using pesticides. So if you have good records, you can, keep track of what you know has worked in the past, what hasn't worked, and you can makes it easier for planning for an upcoming season. Pest resistance. Resistance is the ability of a population to survive application of a pesticide at the rate registered to control that pest. Resistance begins with just a few unique individuals that have been exposed to pesticides. And these few individuals possess the natural genetic ability to survive pesticide treatment. And then, of course, as these ones survive and reproduce, they reproduce resistant offspring, so to speak. So an example, a resistant individual could start from pollen of the original resistant plant that moved in from a neighboring field. So this one kind of came in blurry, but here you've got an example of a leaf full of pests. It's sprayed. The majority of them die. You see a few here that did not die. Those reproduce, and you have more. You spray again, and then what you're finding is the majority of the pests are actually resistant to that chemical. Clues, important resistance clues. If you can catch these clues early, you'll find out if resistance is developing. So if you've used the same herbicides that have the same mode of action on the same field for many years, this could very well contribute to resistance. If initially a particular herbicide was very effective, however, suddenly it loses its effectiveness on one particular weed species. So you might find it's working good, but there's one weed species here that isn't dying and has developed a resistance. The resistant weed is found growing in patches and eventually spreads to the rest of the field. The herbicide continues to control weeds except for the resistant species. Herbicide groups. So this is what's important. If you have resistance, you've recognized it, and you think it's maybe time to change your chemical, it's important to look at the groups. Okay, so rotating herbicides is an excellent strategy to combat resistance. The key, however, is to rotate herbicide group, not just herbicides with different name brands. Okay, so by rotating herbicide groups, you use products that control weeds in different ways. So the Blue Book is a good reference for information regarding herbicide groups. Those of you who are keen to use your smartphones, there is a Blue Book app available now. So I would, if you like using your phone and apps, I would look into that and download that app. So here's an example of some resistant weeds in Alberta. Of course, you can see wild oats, you know, are almost in all of these groups, very resistant weed. So here you got your groups, and here you have your weeds. Okay, so group 2 and wild oats. There's a particular question in your test that's going to ask you, which I forget how the question's worded, but be aware that wild oats in group 2 is a possible answer. Resistant control strategy. Keep detailed records of pesticides used on each field each year. Use a variety of treatment methods to reduce your reliance on pesticides. Use pesticides when monitoring shows they are necessary, and rotate herbicide groups. Use herbicide labels to select an effective tank mix that can delay or prevent herbicide resistance. Inspect fields throughout the growing season to look for weeds that have survived treatment. So here's a couple of pictures. So you can see here, the field's been sprayed, and then you got these patches of green where well, it couldn't have been missed. It's that these are resistant to the chemical that was used. Here's another good example here. Pest and beneficial organism identification. So knowing about the biology of both the pests and the beneficials helps you to make important management decisions, including when in their life cycle the pest is most susceptible to pesticides, knowing how many life cycles a pest has annually, or knowing how rapidly beneficial organisms reproduce to assist in control of pests. Got some more examples in your book on page 9. So you can read through that on your own. Some more pictures. So here you got a bumblebee, or beneficial, obviously. Now here's what's interesting. You recognize this here as a ladybug, but do you recognize what this is? Have you seen this before? And if you have, do you know what it is? Well, this is a ladybug nymph. So this is a baby ladybug that hasn't developed into an adult. Okay, so if you see these are there feeding on aphids and insects on the leaf. So don't be alarmed when you see those, be glad, because it is a ladybug in a nymph stage. Once again, this one has not come through clear, so I'll see if I can get that better next time. Recognition of weeds. So it's good to know what weeds are doing. Are they annuals? Are they winter annuals? Are they biennials or perennials? I'm not going to go into all detail, but just to have a good idea of what kind of weeds you're dealing with and how they grow. Recognition of insect development stages. So insects are distinguished from other animals such as spiders and mites by 4 characteristics. So one, they have a distinctly segmented body parts, 3 distinctly segmented body parts, 6 legs. Mites and spiders have 8 legs, and insects have 2 antennae and an exoskeleton. Insect development or metamorphosis is classified as complete or incomplete. So complete metamorphosis goes through 4 separate life stages. So you have an egg stage, a larva or nymph stage, a pupa stage, and then the adult stage. The larval stage of an insect is often the most damaging to crops. So this would be the worm, caterpillar stage, grub stage. Most damaging, they're feeding, and actually the most effective to treat insects when they're in that stage. Caterpillars, cutworms are the larval stage of a moth or butterfly. So here's the life cycle, adult butterfly. So you've got the egg stage, the caterpillar, larva stage, then you got a pupa resting stage, and then the adult. Ladybug, you go from adult ladybug eggs to the larva to the pupa to the adult. So that's known as complete metamorphosis. Incomplete metamorphosis is a life cycle that goes through various numbers of nymph stages before becoming the adult form. So you have an egg stage, a nymph, but then the nymph, you have what's called instar 1, instar 2. So it's almost little bigger versions of the nymph until it becomes an adult. So here would be an example. You've got your adult dragonfly, you got an egg, and then you got a nymph, and then a little bigger, and then an adult again. Grasshopper, you got your eggs, you got a smaller grasshopper, nymph, and then a little bigger, and then eventually an adult. Okay, so that's known as incomplete metamorphosis. Okay, monitoring. So monitoring or field scouting is the process of regularly inspecting crops and recording the pests that are present and their growth stages. There are 2 types of monitoring methods. So you have visual inspections, counting and measuring methods. We're going to talk a little bit about injury and action threshold. So your injury threshold is when pest population reaches numbers that it causes unacceptable injury or damage. Numbers are sufficient enough to justify treatment. The action threshold is the point at which treatment should take place in order to prevent the pest population reaching the injury threshold. So be familiar with those terms. I have them in bold here. Your injury threshold and your action threshold. Treatment selection requires careful analysis. Treatment should be selected that are least hazardous to human health, least toxic, or otherwise least damaging to crop and adjacent sensitive areas, the land and the environment, most likely to produce long-term improvements, and most cost-effective over time. And then evaluation. You're going to evaluate the effectiveness of the pest management program. Modify and improve the pest management program. Include actions to prevent pests. Anticipate and plan for pest infestations. And then keep track of costs and benefits of the pest management program. And then communicate. Communicating about your IPM program to neighbors, buyers, and the public contribute to the success of your IPM program. And that is the end of Module 5. So I encourage you to work through the exercises in your book in preparation for writing the exam.